So the one thing that does come out of rugby league over the last few years that has been an absolute positive, and we can't, 20 years ago when we first did these shows, there was almost none of this women's rugby league or girls rugby league or whatever being played. There might have been some, a lot of the girls who played younger ended up just quitting sport at 18 because there was nowhere for them to go. There were no clubs. There was no investments in that side. But over the last few years, there's certainly been massive changes in rugby league for certainly for the women's game. And I don't know if you saw the games at all over the last few weeks, where especially the Challenge Cup final and some of the games between some of the top teams in the women's game. I'd like to talk about that for a while because I think that's a real positive out of the game. And we've got to kind of understand whether is this something good the RFL are doing, because I don't know whether this is to do with the RFL or whether this is to do with funding that comes from somewhere else, or if it's grassroots that's bringing this up. Maybe some of you guys know more about this than I do, but because it does seem to be an absolute positive. Let me go with, I'm just going to go with Martyn first, because he might have some ideas about the grassroots side of it, rather than the women's game in particular. I don't know whether he's heard or seen anything, and then maybe we can go around everybody.
So the women's game is definitely one of the growth areas. And going back to my previous mention of our league active, the Rugby League have said if they make a surplus on their funding, they're going to use it to fund women's rugby and PDRL, which is fine. Not an issue with that. That for me that's great. It's funding going in the right place. The women's game is definitely growth. There's some cracking players. I've seen some cracking games. Never going to knock what the girls do, particularly as they do it for note and they put on a big stage. There's one Super League club that I'm aware of that there are issues in their ex-players association because some of them want to accept women into the ex-players association because they are, and the more dinosaur element of said club's ex-players association are like, we don't want women. There's no one under that. No, they should be at home doing whatever they do at home. We don't want them taking our attendance. I couldn't possibly comment. I really couldn't comment on that. But yes, definitely a Yorkshire club, and definitely in the city that I am in right now. But the Women's Super League concept is it's not. A couple of years ago, we were at the All-Party Parliamentary Rugby League group. We used to attend their meetings when Greg Mulholland was the chair. And they had lots of different guest speakers, and one of them was a lady called Sarah Jane Gray, who is something to do with the Rugby League. Not really sure what she did or what she does for them. I think she's still involved 2 or 3 days a week no doubt on a nice wedge. But she was there talking about the women's game, and she was talking about the Super League concept and how they were going to tie the Super League, women's Super League clubs into the amateur clubs. So let's take St Helens, for example. I'm using them because Marie Rimmer was at the meeting and laid into Sarah Jane, as Marie does. And Thata Leith at that point were the top ladies team in the country, without a doubt. Teams at every age group, teams at every level. And were a good success story. Until the Rugby League came along and said, right, we're having Women's Super League, and St Helens get first call on all the ladies teams in your vicinity, and they take precedence. So if St Helens are playing on a Sunday, as are Thata Leith, you will play for St Helens. So they were immediately, that put all the amateur clubs' backs up because they were going to lose their players to play for Super League. It wasn't a case of we will just take those players and you don't see them again. It was one of those situations where the game was dictating who you could play for. And yes, some players would pick playing for the town team or the Super League team because of the kudos that comes with that. But there was no actual thought of the damage they were doing to the game behind it.
Yeah.
And when that was pointed out by some of the members of the group, and it wasn't me, I keep quiet in those things. With too many influential people there that I don't really want to upset, and there's men with guns in Parliament that you really don't want to upset. they were saying the same thing, that you're doing this, but you're going to damage the community game behind it, and they were adamant that wasn't the case. And I think there has been a fair chunk of that. That yes, Women's Super League is growing, but the community game behind it, people have stopped talking about it. And why is that? What's the what's the cause of that?
What's your thoughts on this, Karen? I know you came to us with at RL fans with requirements for, you gave us a kick up the arse essentially and said, we need to do more for women's game. We need to have a Women's Super League forum. And you kicked me out. I'm going to now start doing a Saints Heritage women's kind of, part of the Saints Heritage Society, start inducting them and things like that. Starting to get into that with the guys there. Hopefully we can move that forward. What's your take on all this?
I think if you look at the fans, we're not like football. There's probably just as many women go to watch their teams as men. That's been the case as long as I've been a Hull fan. And I think to grow the women's game, they're never going to be equal. Unfortunately, they're never going to be equal. They're always going to be the amateur side. But it's really important that we encourage them into their own clubs, grow them into their own clubs. I know that Hull announced this week the Centre of Excellence with Cumbria. And I know that one of the things that James Clark has been very, very big on is having a Hull FC club. So the first team, the academy, the women, the PDRL, the wheelchair. We've been speaking to Leeds about their basketball side. He wants, within the university, a Hull FC brand where whether you are a first team, Jake Connor, Max Mead, whatever, or one of the wheelchair guys, or one of the women, you can use the same facilities. You get access to the same physios, the same treatment table, the same advice from the guys at the university. And I think that's so important. I find it really sad what Martyn said about a Super League team that is one of the biggest clubs in the country that have the wheelchair, the PDRL, the ladies, and have this big advocate for these guys, yet they don't see them as equals within the club. And I think that's heartbreaking, because if they're wearing that badge on their shirt and they're representing that club, they are that club to me.
Yeah,
whether
absolutely.
they are professional, running out in front of Sky cameras week in, week out, or whether they are on the amateur side. It doesn't matter for me. They are part of your club. They are running out wearing your shirt. And you've seen it within the Castleford and York debacle. Castleford, I'm hearing this second, third hand, but Castleford, the women have this little porter cabin within the car park, and that's it. Whereas the girls at York are using every single facility that the men are, the same as Hull are trying to do, and they feel a part of that York club.
Yeah.
And that's why 5 of their players went to York, because they want to feel as though they are a valued member of the club, not the team, the club. And I think that's what every club needs to be doing, not just for the women, for the wheelchair, for the PDRL, and really start building it as a brand, not just as individual teams.
It's a good idea. It's a good thought about the one club mentality, isn't it? We can't, we're all equal when it comes to rugby league, and when it comes to building a club's support base, we always say that treat everybody the same. Don't be giving free tickets out to certain individuals because they're close to your mates. If they do something, then great, do that. But let's all become the same people. And I know Martyn and myself have been on this train for a long time, trying to get supporters involved more. And I think they'll drive that forward as well, because we all drive the community the same. I think there are obviously going to be some nutters who poo-poo the women's game. But do you think that there's kind of, when you look at the table, and from what my point of view, I've not really seen a whole lot about the women's game apart from over the last year or two, which kind of shows that how much has come to the fore, really. Do you think there's almost like 2 or 3 teams that have got all the best players? It feels to me, and I know that's kind of like the same in most sports where you get that, but it does seem that the game, when you look at when I first did the Rugby League fans table, the Isle fans table, and for the Super League women, and I had to do the win percentages and all the new fandangled percentages you've got to do because of COVID. I had to code all that. And then when I put it into the system, I was like, my God, these guys have got a difference of 1,050 or something. The top 3 teams are all, and the bottom team had like 13 was that was a massive difference in, when you look at the top of the teams at the moment, Leeds and Wigan and Saints and Castleford are all well over 100 with only 30 points against, after 4 games, 20 points against, and the other end of the table, it's a massive difference. Do you think that do you think it's a bad way of doing the women's game at the moment, in the fact that it produces a few very good games, but because the teams are kind of heavy on the best players in a few clubs, that it's kind of ruining it a little bit? How does that work?
I think from my point of view, that's the same, certainly in amateur rugby, that a lot of players follow the coaches around, or wherever you get your best stash of gear from, which is really sad. But that's what, maybe not so much now, but maybe 10 years ago, there were certain clubs that would throw 200 T-shirts at you.
Can I just stop you there and clarify? When you say stack of gear, you just mean
clothing,
like goalposts and clothing, right? Yeah,
clothing, boots,
almost always.
Bags, yeah, all your O'Neill gear that you're wearing, and the wardrobe I've got full behind me.
I understand.
But yeah, that sort of stuff, and yeah, I've had players play for Bramley that go from club to club collecting stashes of gear because it's like a badge of honour, and the Super League concept is fantastic, but is it too early in the women's game formation that they're pushing these players to play at this high level, and not all the teams are there yet? So I do a bit of sponsorship with Huddersfield Giants ladies team through a guy I used to work with, and his daughter plays for them and Dewsbury Moor, which makes me cry because it's Dewsbury Moor. But and they're at the bottom of the table and getting beat most weeks. But is it too soon for them? Have they rushed the idea in typical Rugby League fashion, that they've had an idea, they've seen the Aussies do it, let's go with it? And I'm not going to say it's falling flat, because it's not. I've seen some cracking games. But is it too soon for where they are, for where the Rugby League's trying to pitch them at?
Or it's smaller. It's kind of almost like there's 2 leagues within one league. And I don't mean that like Super League where, Salford and Wakefield or whatever, because there's always good games, but there does seem to be disparaging 60-0, 30-0, 30-12, that doesn't seem to kind of, those lower teams don't seem to ever get a good crack at, the top teams. But in saying that, I saw one fantastic, the most amazing game I've seen so far of the Women's Rugby League was the Origin game down under last weekend, I think it was. And the game was 8-6 Queensland. And it was an absolutely first class, superb game, end to end. There was even some fighting going on, a bit of biff. It was a quality game, and it was right to the very end, end to end. And the fitness was, you sometimes watch some of the Super League clubs and you think, oh, fitness is great, but not quite. But the fitness of those players was absolutely top class. Every single one of them was, you could tell this was going to be, these were top. And when you look at the results for Australia and New Zealand versus England, because England beat Wales 6-0 last week in the women's game. But when they play Australia and New Zealand, it's another level, even more so than it is between England men's, and you just see the game. That's how the England game should be, where they should be heading that way, but taking steady steps. How does that, did any of you guys see the State of Origin women's at all?
I saw bits of it. I was napping through some of it, unfortunately. But are Australian ladies team's not professional? Do they not get paid for that?
No, I think that's what I'm suggesting. That's the end
That's
product.
part of it.
That's where we've got to be. We've got to be at that point with the game. Again, there's a whole thousands of players who are doing amateur when there's obviously there's obviously TV for it because it's on TV. So the TV, there's spectators for it, there's money for it. So
I think money. It sort of ties into what Mike was saying earlier as well. That Phil Gould. Well, yeah, you got two greats of rugby league, Mike McLennan and Phil Gould, both saying there's an issue with Origin. But if you've diversified, so you've got two Origins running parallel, the men's and the women's, then that it's less likely you've got a year where Origin is a total dud, because even if if the men's game is not competitive, then chances are that the women's will be. And I think that's true, in any rugby league competition, that it just makes absolute sense. So I totally agree with everything Karen was saying about, really the moral imperative of making sure rugby league's open to everyone, more so than it has been before. But there's also, even if you were totally amoral and just interested in the bottom line, it still makes sense. It's still something that's in the interests of everyone to do, because it's just better business.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to what's been said, really, I think I've not watched this year's Origin yet, but I did watch last couple of years on England, Papua New Guinea as well last year. I can't remember the Papua New Guinea girl who was an absolute beast, monster. The quality's there, no issue on that. This issue about, a two-tier league, well, if you started it, you might as well keep going with it now. There's no point dragging it back. You can reform it, maybe, if you want to do. There's an issue there, though, as well, isn't there, that Martyn's identified, which is what sort of compensation needs to be arranged for teams lower down, amateur teams, whatever, that have invested their time, develop. What do they get out of it? Which, again, goes back to a governance issue, doesn't it, about the overarching strategic vision for the sport. The gap and the difference will come in the during time, unless unless it's the same crappy Super League clubs that are coaching crap at the bottom of the table that coach the crap into the women as well in the women's game. But there's no guarantee of that, because you've got different coaching setups, haven't you, on either side. So you could have a good Wakefields women's team theoretically.
Yeah, I think it's a.
Anyway,
go on, Karen.
I was just going to say, to round up the women's game, I was very honoured to be part of the launch of the film Power Mary. I don't know if anybody has heard about it. And what it is, it films the Papua New Guinea, the Orchids side, from conception through to their first international game within the World Cup. And it's fantastic. It really is. It has you in tears, because, Papua New Guinea, their national sport is rugby league, but it's for the men. And what these women went through to actually be recognised as rugby players and everything, and it's just amazing, absolutely amazing. And I would recommend anybody, if you can, if you've not seen it, to watch it. It's Power Mary, but it's spelled MERI, and it's an amazing insight to what the Papua New Guinean women went through to become a team for the World Cup. It's brilliant.
Cool. In true YouTube fashion, if this does go out, unbelievably, I will put a link down below.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you can watch it, but
we'll find some way of getting some information to it.
Joe that directed it was part of the predecessors to our fans when the chat rooms were doing the rounds.
Right.
Yeah, so I've known Joe Lester for.
Oh, Joe.
Yeah,
Lester,
probably
right,
since.
okay, cool.
Yeah, it's Joe Lester. She's the one that did it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's I've known her probably as long as we've been doing these rugby shows.
Brilliant.
which is a
Oh,
scary
well,
thought.
She's genuinely the future of the game. Like when she's in charge of everything, then things will be fine. Which is another argument for getting the women's game as much prominence as possible, because then you've got a whole load of other people with means of getting up and through the structures of the game. I think we'd be in a lot better place if we had more Joanna Lesters at the top of the game and less Nigel Woods.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this, weren't we, on Twitter the other week? About, I don't know the name, I'm afraid. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name, but she's now working for the Lawn Tennis Association.
Oh, Sally Bolton.
And she's now on TV every day this week and next week, probably talking about it. And she used to, she was involved in rugby league, wasn't she?
Was she not diversity and inclusion director or something like that?
Yeah.
She got an OBE for the Rugby League World Cup in 2013.
And now she's kind of the chief at the Lawn Tennis Association, not the chief at Rugby League. Anyway, we do let people pass through, unfortunately, sometimes, and it's just not good enough sometimes. But I don't know whether she's still working for the game. I hope she is, because no. Okay.
No, she was. They were trying to convince her to apply last time the CEO role came up, and she ruled herself out pretty immediately.
Fair enough.